Doyle. Brie, take it away.
Thank you, Megan. I am just so happy to be here with all of you tonight. We're also in the DC, I'm in the DC area. We have lots of elections going on here. And just a little housekeeping, I'm in a home with two large dogs who have been inside in rain with not able to go outside because of the rain. So hope that they're fully exercised and calmed down, but if you hear some barking, that's what's going on. Well, thank you so much for having me tonight. I met a lot of you this summer at the NSTOY conference, where we started to talk about issues of hunger in our schools and thinking about ways that teachers can be part of the solution by really increasing access to students' participation in the federal nutrition programs, especially starting with school breakfast. So we're here tonight to talk a little bit more about that. And then, spoiler alert, Megan and I are excited to announce a unique opportunity this year to engage members of NSTOY in a year-long fellowship. So stick around for the end for that excitement. I'd like to just start our conversation today by sharing this quote. We had a school principal from Virginia who's been really active in breakfast after the bell work and really just all kinds of wraparound services for her students in a high needs school in Bristol, Virginia, which is just on the Tennessee border. And she said, which I think a lot of educators can resonate with, nothing we do inside the school building will stick in a child's brain until their basic needs have been met. So I think that's really the crux of what we want to talk about in our time together tonight. So just to start, I'd love to go over our quick agenda. We'd love to see who's in the room tonight, who's joining our conversation. I'd like to just take a step back in the conversation to give a very top level overview of the National School Breakfast Program, and then make a connection to education and education issues. Why should teachers and education groups care about food in schools? Then I'd like to share with you some of the best practices that we've learned in our work in conjunction with other organizations that are doing this work, to just give kind of a starting point of the conversation. And I think any webinar or any professional learning experience really is enhanced when we can think about what you can actually take back to your work this week from this webinar. So to start, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Brie Doyle. I am the Senior Manager of National Partnerships on the Share Our Strength No Kid Hungry campaign. We're based in Washington, D.C. Prior to this work, I spent my career in the K-12 education space, teaching in rural, urban, and suburban settings. I was primarily an elementary school teacher and an elementary reading specialist. I also taught special education and did staff development. And then most recently, I was working at the University of Maryland in teacher preparation and then administering federally funded research, mostly in the area of literacy and with low income and English language learner students. So the perspective that I bring to this work, why did I switch out of academia and work in the K-12 space to an anti-hunger organization? Well, like many teachers, I spent many of my days providing food for students that were hungry, whether those students came from a very affluent home or a home with fewer resources. I knew that hungry kids couldn't learn. And so there was a point in my doctoral career when I was, trying to figure out answers to all the hard-hitting questions about literacy. And I looked around and I saw many students were just hungry. And I thought, why am I working on all of these literacy questions if we're not thinking about students' basic needs being met? In my time at Share Our Strength, it's really resonated with me that I didn't know very much about what was going on in the school cafeteria. And so I really think what happens in the cafeteria, I was usually going to the cafeteria when a student was getting in trouble or misbehaving or helping them find funding for their meals. And I just didn't know enough about what went on in the cafeteria. And I know that as my organization, we ask education groups to really take on the work of fighting hunger in schools. But I also know that education stakeholders have a lot of new initiatives. I remember in the classroom that it was like every month, every year, every staff development meeting, there was something new that I was supposed to be trying out in addition to meeting all of the needs of my students, their academic needs, their social emotional needs. And so I want to keep that in mind as I'm working with you all. And then I know that for me, it's more of an explicit solution now, but I don't think that many people see school nutrition programs as an explicit solution to education issues. So I would love to dig deeper into that conversation with you. And I've been lucky in this work to form a partnership with Megan Allen, and I'm just so excited that she's our partner in this work. And so I'd love for her to just jump in and tell us why she thinks this is important to her.
Thanks for getting us started, Brie. So I have the pleasure of working for the National Network of State Teachers of the Year, and I am a State Teacher of the Year. So I get to think about how we can put teachers in positions to make student learning front and center in a lot of our conversations. And I think we have a really great opportunity here in looking at the impact of hunger and kind of addressing hunger as an opportunity gap in our classrooms. So I'm excited to be here, excited to bring that advocacy and teacher leadership lens and my experience too as a former 4th and 5th grade teacher. So thank you, Brie.
Thanks, Megan. My unmute button moved from the right side of my screen to the bottom of my screen, so it took me a second to find it. Well, enough about us. We'd love to know who we have in the room with us tonight. So we'd love for you to just take the next minute or two to enter into the chat box your responses to these questions. So we're really interested to know who's here, what is your position in education? Let us know if you're with a school district or a specific school. We'd love to know the location, city, and state. And just, what perspective are you bringing to this work, and what do you hope to take away tonight? So lots of old friends here. We have Brett from Portland, Oregon, and Bill Day, who's at Two Rivers here in DC. Angela, who you'll hear more from tonight. We're excited to hear your story, Angela. Some friends from Massachusetts and Memphis. Hi, Marguerite. We have Catherine McClellan, our research partner here. Hi, Lisa. We're glad to see you here tonight. Lots of old friends. It's exciting to see everybody. We'll give her about one more minute to finish up your chat boxes. There's Susan. Hi, Susan. And Sarah from Louisville. And Michelle from Colorado. Well, thank you so much. I'll let people keep typing in. And I will continue moving on as you keep doing that, typing that you're bringing here. I just wanted to share with you a little bit about who we are. So campaign that's been in existence for about the last 7 years under the umbrella organization of Share Our Strength. Share Our Strength started as an anti-hunger organization about 30 years ago by a brother and a sister who were really impacted by the images they saw coming out of the Ethiopian famine crisis. And so they really just started raising funds to help international hunger relief. And then within the last 10 years, we turned to a domestic focus, and we focused on childhood hunger issues in the United States and looking at really sustainable solutions. So one of the things that we saw as one of the most sustainable and obvious solutions that we have in the fight against childhood hunger is to help increase the access to the participation in the federal nutrition programs that are currently being operated in most schools across the country. And for, we talk about school breakfast, summer meals, and after school snacks, but tonight we really want to just focus on breakfast. We also work on a few other programs. We have a Cooking Matters program, which is a nutrition education program focused on teaching families how to stretch their their federally funded, their WIC and their SNAP benefits, stretch those budgets to have the most nutritious bang for their buck. And then we really work on systems change by engaging state and local levels around this critical issue of hunger. And not a surprise to any of you here, I know that most teachers know hungry kids can't learn, but we do have research to, back that up, that kids that are hungry are coming to school less. They can't concentrate in school. Kids that can't concentrate or feel successful in school are more likely in the long run to drop out and to feel social stigma around their performance and their lack of food, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we know that you on the front lines, teachers, we do a regular survey about every other year of teachers and education groups, and we know that you see this on the front lines. 3 out of 4 educators that we survey see kids coming to school hungry. 57% of teachers regularly buy food for their students, and most teachers, I think this number is a little bit low because I would argue that there are probably some teachers out there that are probably spending almost $300 a month of their own money on food for their students. So No Kid Hungry really thinks that by focusing on the National School Breakfast Program, we can fill some of those food gaps that students are facing to increase their academic achievement in school. So before we start, I know we're not going to be able to do breakout rooms tonight, I don't think. Megan, correct me if I'm wrong. But if you wouldn't mind just putting in the chat box, maybe just, a couple bullet points of anything that you know about the National School Breakfast Program and anything that you might have heard of about breakfast after the bell. So I'll just give everybody about a minute and a half to write down some ideas there. Oops. And if you don't know anything about the National School Breakfast Program or breakfast after the bell, your response could just be, I'm not really sure. So thank you for being vulnerable and saying that, some of us don't know about breakfast after the bell. I didn't really know about breakfast after the bell. The first time I saw it was when I was a researcher at the University of Maryland, and I was in a classroom getting ready to do a day-long observation of a 3rd grade teacher, and I saw a little delivery cart come in with food for kids to eat at their desks while they did their morning routine. And I thought, this teacher is bonkers. How is she going to let them eat in their classrooms? But after spending a year in that school, I really saw the benefits of it. I see we'll hear from Megan Hall a little bit later, but she lived through a switch to breakfast after the bell in her school. And I see some people bringing up some questions about the nutrition concerns. So thank you all for sharing your thinking there. If you want to keep typing in, that's fine too. I will keep moving on. So it's fine to not know much about school breakfast. As teachers, many of us are in the building before kids come in. School breakfast might be happening in the time that we're in a prep period in our classrooms. And so it's not uncommon that teachers don't know too much about school breakfast or breakfast after the bell. But just again, why do we think breakfast is important? Why are we taking a beautiful Tuesday evening from you to discuss it? Well, because we think at No Kid Hungry that breakfast can change lives. So we have evidence to suggest through research that kids that eat school breakfast, especially when they're given access to breakfast in a way that doesn't have as many barriers, they miss less school. So they're attending more than an average of 1.5 more days a year. There is a relationship between the participation in breakfast and students' performance on math. And then we know in the long term that the more likely kids are to be in school, the higher their math and reading scores are, the more likely they are towards a graduation trajectory. So some of this is new to me. I'm not going to go too into the weeds on the breakfast program elements or the nutritional standards, but just to give you some context, the National School Breakfast Program is administered at the local level. It's administered at the federal level through the United States Department of Agriculture. So the United States Department of Agriculture sets forth a reimbursable meal pattern that is for school breakfast. A meal that is reimbursed by the government is required to include a whole grain, a fruit, and a milk. So if a school district is claiming reimbursement by the federal government, they can only do it on a school breakfast that has those three components. Dependent on a family's income level, students can qualify for free, reduced, or paid rate lunches, and then the federal government reimburses the school district based on each student's reimbursement qualification. So free, for instance, if a student qualifies for a free meal in a non-severe need, which is most of the mainland United States, the school district would receive $1.66 back. So it's not too much, but the school district is getting some reimbursement and some support from the federal government. That's why we think that this is an important sustainable program. And so a lot of people are concerned about the nutrition guidelines. I am too. I'm very health conscious. I want to make sure that I'm eating vegetables and fruits each day. And so it's helpful to know that the school breakfast program, and I'm guilty of this, when I was looking at school breakfast, I would think, they're just serving kids Pop-Tarts every day. But if I step back and I did some reflection, I realized that they're probably serving Pop-Tarts like once a month or something like that, but that was just the day that I was remembering what was being served for breakfast. But you can see in this chart that over the course of a week, for instance, students in grades K to 5 are required to have 5 fruits and vegetables, 7 grains, 5 cups of milk, and that there are calorie, fat, sodium, and sugar requirements, as well as whole grain requirements. So even if you are seeing something that looks like something you could buy in a corner store, that's, that Pop-Tart or that muffin or that cinnamon roll is actually whole grain rich, less sugar, less fat, less sodium. So it's not the same that you can buy in the store. And something that I learned in a conference recently is that, the way that the nutrition standards are written are to specifically fill the gaps, the deficiencies in the standard American diet. So the school meals programs are really designed to fill those nutrient deficiencies. So it is important that students are participating in the program. So why are we talking about changing up the model of school breakfast? Well, if you think about it, I think about the elementary school that I was working in most intimately in the last few years, and the students were dropped off in the gym, and the gym was on one side of the building. The cafeteria was up a hill on the opposite side of the building. So and children, when they came in, they went to stay in the gym. That was the holding place before they were released to their classrooms. So very few students even knew that breakfast was being served in the cafeteria, if they could even get themselves to the cafeteria, and if they had enough time. So we see that happening in lots of other places as well. So, the bus or the carpool doesn't arrive to school in time for students to make it to the cafeteria or make it through the cafeteria line, sit down and eat their meal before going to class. The cafeteria may not be convenient for where the students are. There may be something like all the kids are hanging out in the gym, and that, the kids have to make a decision between hanging out with their friends before school or going to eat alone in the cafeteria. There is a stigma in many schools that the school breakfast is just for the poor kids. We find that a lot of times older students, middle and high school students, may just not be that hungry in the morning. And then one that comes up quite often is that reduced price meals may just not be reduced enough. So we hear from a lot of high school students. Actually, Feeding America and the Urban Institute did a study of teen food insecurity just in the last year or so. And one of the things they found is that teenagers in high school were often making food budget decisions for the rest of their family, and that, if they were on a reduced price meal program, that the older children would either eat breakfast or lunch, but not both, so that their younger siblings were able to eat multiple meals in the day. Feel free to type into the box if you see any, if you have any experience with any other reasons why you might think traditional breakfast in the cafeteria might not work. Or you can also type in there, maybe if you just like don't even have a clue about how breakfast is served in your building, or if there is any if there are any barriers to accessing breakfast in your building. I see a lot of people typing in that they see stigma in their buildings. A lot of people saying maybe the kids are hungry when they're coming to school, but they just don't have time to get breakfast and then it's not available again. Lots of kids are getting dropped off in the morning before the school, after the breakfast line closes. Great, we'll keep those thoughts coming. You feel free to chat in the box. I'm going to keep moving just for the interest of time. So we have this breakfast gap, right? There's kids participating in school lunch. The way when people are asking me why they should care about school breakfast in a school building, I say, well, do you even think about do you have a second thought about the fact that there's a break for lunch in the middle of the day and that lunch is served in the cafeteria? It's just the way it's always been. Nobody's ever asked adults to make change around that. So there's this gap between the kids that are free and reduced eligible, even the paid students that are paying for lunch in schools, but aren't participating in school breakfast. So one of the food service directors that we work with closely in Minnesota said, I think this is a really good quote. She says, we have the food, we have lots of hungry students, we just have to make a plan strategically to figure out the best ways to get the food to them. So that's what Breakfast After the Bell is really all about. We know as educators that food is key to academic success. Lori Calvert in some of her advertising for this webinar said, you know, Maslow's before Bloom's. We can't talk about Bloom's taxonomy. We can't talk about kids' academic achievement if we don't have those two base levels of Maslow's pyramid, right? We need to get them their basic needs, their food, their shelter, but we also need them to feel secure. If a student is wondering where their next meal is coming from, they can't be secure in their school, so they can't be thinking about the lessons or the questions that you're asking them, the tasks you're asking them to complete, the thinking you want them to do. We know, and a lot of you have put in a lot of your own observations, that kids are missing out on traditional breakfast in the cafeteria, and a lot of that is for adult reasons. So adults are contributing to some of the barriers to kids accessing food in their cafeteria. So we think that a solution to addressing this gap in breakfast is to really engage educators as advocates for breakfast after the bell. So I had a lot of these assumptions coming into this work as an educator. I didn't have a lot of them down on paper or data to support them. You know, a lot of my anecdotal conversations with folks that I knew, with teachers in the field, my own observations supported that. But I really wanted to dig a little bit deeper and get some data on paper. So your wonderful NSTOY network helped us validate a study and put it out, and a lot of you probably responded to that survey. So I'm excited to share some of the findings from that. One of the things that I really wanted to know from teachers in just a really open-ended way, and NSTOY, you know, especially because you all are the cream of the crop, you are doing everything you can for your students. So I really wanted to know from you, what do you see as the contributions to academic success in your students? So all of these things under general concerns in bold were the things that were most often cited amongst the membership. And you can see that all of these concerns that were the most often cited are things that don't have to do specifically with pedagogy. So basic needs and food security were the top two issues that were cited amongst your membership as contributions to academic success. Positive results, relationships with adults, which a lot of times if we're feeding another, that leads to positive relationships, feeling safe in school, feeling supported by our school, social emotional learning, and community supports. Those were all of the things that people noted as the top contributors to academic success. We also asked what are some of the major barriers to academic success. And so the answers to this question came up in really 4 buckets. These were all open-ended questions. So poverty was a major barrier to academic success, and food security, basic needs not being met, and lack of access to healthcare and poor health were some of the top responses there. We also saw a lot of the home factors, we saw school factors, and then we saw social, emotional, and mental health factors. So underlying in all of these, there were a lot of issues that came up around food security and students not feeling safe. I see a question just came in.
Good eye, Brie. Michelle had a question about how the training happens to support understanding of this program with administrators and classified as well as certified staff.
That's a great question, Michelle, and I would love for you to apply and join our fellowship to help us answer it. Yeah, I think that that's really why we want to come to you, the education folks that are the leaders here, because and follow-up resources will send this out as well, that you know, my impression and my conversations with school principals are the same. I think that we would find very similar results to the survey results that we found from the NSTOY network, that the cafeteria is separate. The budget for the cafeteria does not come out of the general education fund. It is a separate school nutrition budget. The principal does not supervise the cafeteria staff. There's not a lot of overlap between education and cafeteria staff, except that you coexist inside of a school building. So we're really looking for people in both the school nutrition space, but also the education space, to raise up the importance of this work and to start to build bridges across the two departments to really co-advocate for increased access. And so that's kind of the next frontier. We're trying to find advocates and champions right now, and then really start to roll out more training that is comprehensive for all of the different folks. So, you know, paraeducators, custodial staff, front office staff, school nurses, school counselors, all of that. So I'm going to keep going with some of these connections to education, and I see some really good questions about the food and the nutrition pieces of that. So if you all don't mind, keep them coming, and then we'll table them a little bit late in the next little section of questions, if that's okay. But please keep bringing your questions, and Megan will keep flagging them for me too. Please. So these are just other things that we know happen in schools. Kids have headaches and upset stomachs if they're not eating, but we know that when kids are participating in school meals, they say that they see a noted improvement in their reduction in headaches and upset stomachs, and we hear the same thing. There's fewer nurse visits. Kids are aware that when they're participating and they have adequate food, that they can pay better attention and behave better in the classroom, and they feel that it contributes to an improvement in their grades. So in addition to the survey work that we did amongst the NSTOY network, we've also conducted some focus groups. And so these are some things that the next few slides will just kind of explicate some of the themes that teachers in those focus groups really raised up, you know, and one of them is just basic education 101 that we've just talked about. If kids' basic needs are not being met, food, water, shelter, if they're not feeling secure and safe, then they can't attend to education. So we really see school breakfast as a connection to education, and that it is addressed in Maslow's needs. We also see school breakfast as an equity issue, right? So most of us have probably seen this graphic where, you know, on the left side, we see equality, where everybody's given kind of the same stoop to stand on to see over the fence, and you can see how far that gets. And equity, we're, you know, giving different people different needs, different stoops based on their heights. And so when we're thinking about school breakfast and really focusing in on increasing access with a target towards students with those free and reduced eligible participation rates, then I see, you know, this is the equity. But I really see our work as a liberation issue, right? So we know that kids from all different kinds of homes, whether they're wealthy or they have fewer resources, there are a lot of kids coming to school without eating food. So if we can encourage kids to eat breakfast, no matter what their family's means are, if it's available to them, then we're really reducing barriers and just having everybody have an equal chance at school. I also think in some ways, and this has resonated with other teachers as well, is that if we're thinking about education interventions, you know, there's a place, it's not an obvious one, but giving kids access to basic needs in schools is kind of a tier 1 intervention, right? We know that if kids are fed, their behavior is going to be better. We also know that if we can feed kids, that they can attend better to classwork and into their academic achievement. So we really see this as an education intervention. It's not just something that happens in the cafeteria. And then, I think that this is part of our social emotional learning conversation. If we're trying to teach kids self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, skills in relationship, and social aware, and all of these things within the social emotional learning bucket, if kids have not been fed and they're angry or hangry, as that term is that is so popular now, then, they can't really attend to these other self-awareness, self-management, etc. So it's part of it. And then we also see that when we can bring breakfast into the classroom, or bring meals into the educational arena a little bit more, that it creates a calmer climate, and one in which children and students can have conversations around relationship skills. It creates community and in a sense of care amongst each other, whether that's student to student or teacher to student as well. So it just helps foster that social emotional learning as well. So I'll stop there for a second and answer any questions. But what we really want to do now, and Megan, you can jump in here and say how you want to do this. We have some NSTOY experts on the line here. So we have Bill Day from DC and Megan Hall from Minnesota. And then we also have Angela Homan, who have all worked in Breakfast After the Bell programs. And so we thought that it would be best to hear from them. So we'd love for them to be able to talk about what breakfast looked like before, they were serving it in their classroom. What did they notice once they brought it into their classroom? What were some of the challenges and what were some of the benefits of this work? So Megan, I don't think we can put people in breakout groups, but what were you thinking we could do for this part?
Sure. So Bill had to hop off because he had a sick kid, but I know, multitasking, right? That's what we're all doing, working, learning, and attending to family. So I totally get it. Megan and Angela are here. Maybe we could do, Brie, there was a question from Karen about how foods were included, how they chose the foods included in the meals. If you want to maybe address that question, Steve also had some good questions, and I'll get Megan all set up for sharing her piece.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, let me pull up that question. So how are the foods chosen? The foods are really chosen by the school nutrition department. So one of the things is that, school nutrition departments have to operate within a budget that's separate from the general education fund. So you'll hear sometimes a food nutrition department talking about revenue generating. They can't create a huge revenue, but it's really just, it's like a rainy day savings account is what they can generate there. They don't want to be operating at a deficit. The foods have to be in those 3 different meal pattern requirement categories that we mentioned, and they have to meet the nutritional standards. Depending on the school district, there may be a contract with a food service management company that plans the meals. There may be district employees that plan the meals in conjunction with a registered dietitian. There may be meals that are vended out. The thing to know is that we see, and we've heard time and time again from school nutrition departments, that as more students participate in the meal programs, whether it's lunch or breakfast, the school nutrition department has more buying power, so they can actually start to buy in healthier foods. If they know more kids are going to be participating in breakfast each day, they can have more whole fruits available to them. Sometimes we see that nutrition departments can even do more scratch cooking, so it's not prepackaged foods that's being served to the students. So it's really dependent on the school budget. It's dependent on the menu planning, and it's dependent on the purchasing power of the school district based on participation numbers.
That's kind of amazing, Brie. I had no idea.
Yes, it's very complicated.
I feel like it's something that I always had around as a teacher, but I don't think I knew all the pieces behind it, all the layers behind it, nor what I could really do with it if I had known more. So this is all great information. We have Megan Olivia Hall all teed up and ready, and she's going to share a little bit about her experience with breakfast after the bell.
Great.
Hey everybody, can you hear me?
You sound great, Megan.
Okay, great. In the chat, I'm gonna share a web link that I've been sort of multitasking, glancing at as we've been talking today. This is the website for my school district's nutrition services. It's pretty outstanding, and I didn't really realize how outstanding nutrition was in St. Paul Public Schools until I started hearing more about what it's like in other districts. It was about 5 years ago, I think, that our nutrition services went through some really big changes. And one of those changes was that we switched from having breakfast served in the cafeteria to having sort of a buffet line with a bag that students could pick and choose what they wanted to have for breakfast, pop it into the bag, and they could bring their bag to class and eat in class. And I noticed when that happened that lots more kids started eating breakfast. Now my son, who is in 3rd grade, is eating breakfast every day at home, and then he really likes his school breakfast, so he eats it at school too. And they do have a lot of nice choices there. There's fruits, there's always some kind of grain option, but this is kind of cool. Our nutrition services knows how to like sneak in whole grains. So from a distance, it might look like, they call it a breakfast cookie, but if you look closer, it's like whole grains and carrots, and it is a grain, but it's pretty low sugar and pretty high in the whole grains. I'm a science teacher, so a challenge for me is having food in the science lab, which goes against OSHA regulations. You're not supposed to eat in a lab space. And so I really encourage my students to try to have their food not touch the lab table directly, to try to keep things clean and to avoid any possible lab contamination. And then sometimes the eating can go on for like half an hour into the first class period, and we don't have time built into that first class period to allow for extra eating. So I try to encourage my students to enjoy their breakfast and then clean up as class is getting started. I'd say huge benefits though, kids with full stomachs, kids that are energetic, they aren't hungry, they're comfortable, they can focus. And the breakfast is enjoyable. It's nice to watch kids enjoy their cheese stick or banana or, whole grain option, whatever they pick. And some days it's even a hot option, which I think they really enjoy. So it's kind of a quick summary of what breakfast after the bell is like where I teach. And again, if you hop on that website, it's nutrition.spps, like stpaulpublicschools.org. It's kind of awesome. It's not just healthy food. It's like ethnically sensitive food, really diverse offerings, local offerings. They source things at local farms and got lots and lots of fruits and veggies.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Megan, for sharing that. Angela, are you with us? And can you tell us a little bit about your experience with breakfast after the bell?
Sure, I'm here. I teach in a very small elementary school. And prior to this, and what the rest of the building is still doing, is eating breakfast in our cafeteria from 7:55 to 8:10 when the buses are arriving, and is our prior to homeroom time. My students now eat in the classroom with me. I am not afforded just the time to have breakfast because my superintendent is very big on instructional minutes. And so I can't take time out. So I read aloud to my students while they're eating breakfast. Probably something that I'm doing a little different than what I've heard from everyone else is most of my students buy breakfast, but I also allow my students to pack a breakfast and bring it to school. And that when I surveyed them prior to today's webinar, they said that was one of their favorite parts, is that they can bring their breakfast from home too, just like they can pack their lunch. So what we do is right as the end of the morning is happening for the rest of school and school is starting, we go over and get in the cafeteria line and buy breakfast and bring it into the room. We also bring a trash can with us. back to the room so that we can throw away. We use all disposable trays, which is so bad for the environment, but that's what we do. And so they can throw everything away, and they eat for 15 minutes while I read, which is about the same time that's allowed in the cafeteria. But what they like about my room is that, and this was weird, there's fourth graders telling me, they like that they can listen to the story and be with their friends during that time in the morning. But the paraprofessionals that supervise the cafeteria make them be quiet for the last 5 minutes that they're in there so everybody finishes eating. And mine are quiet for the whole 15 minutes because I'm reading aloud to them. But that was the one thing that they said they liked. My biggest challenge, and I see it in the chat box, is maple syrup. That was my biggest hesitation. I didn't want breakfast in my classroom with maple syrup with my 9-year-olds, but we have had no instances at all where it's gotten on the floor or anything. A couple little things in the desk and they just wipe it up. But my children do not want to go back to the cafeteria. They want to continue to eat in the room. So that's my story.
Thank you, Angela. And I think you have some takers for people who want to come to your class and eat breakfast while you read. What a wonderful way to start the day and build community.
Yeah, I agree. And I love how, so I would like to just, jump in and share a little bit about Angela. That I hope this is okay, Angela, but we met this summer at the NSTOY conference, and she came to our focus group, and I wasn't sure if she was interested in what we were talking about or not, but at the end she came up and said to me, I'm just going to tell my principal this is what I'm doing. I'm going to do this. I had a student last year that needed to eat breakfast every morning, and she made the choice between eating with her, hanging out with her friends, which is, what a third grader or fourth grader would do, or eating breakfast, but she really needed to eat breakfast. And so Angela emailed me the next week and said, I already talked to my school nutrition director, I talked to my school principal, and it's happening, and I'm out the door doing this. So I think just like one person can make great change, and what a good example for the rest of the building as well. So thank you so much for sharing, Megan and Angela. I really appreciate it. Yeah, and I see a lot of people writing in about the cafeteria being so big and noisy, and there's lots of rules. And, a lot of cafeterias that I've been through, I've been to a lot now in my time at Cherish Strength. When you talk to the school principal, they'll say, well, the cafeteria was made for 3 different seatings of lunch, and we can't, if we're in a school of 1,000, that's 300 kids or 350 kids per lunch period, but we can't have 1,000 kids in the cafeteria before the school day starts. So it makes sense why it's hard. It doesn't make sense, but it explains why it's so noisy and it's so busy if kids are going to the cafeteria for breakfast. And so there's just a lot of different barriers to kids accessing breakfast in the traditional model. So some of the things that we found to be really successful, and we will keep diving into these next week in our next webinar, but we see that if we can take breakfast into the classroom, so breakfast is brought in rolling carts or on trays to the classroom and served and eaten in the classroom after the school bell, while instruction is going on, and that's dependent on the locality of what's counted for instructional time. So a read aloud might count, a morning routine might count. But if we can serve breakfast in that way, we see an average participation of 88% of students participating in breakfast if it's served in the classroom. When students are given a second chance to eat breakfast, so there may be breakfast served before the beginning of the day, but then we see this effective, especially in like middle and high schools where there's some passing time, either, a little break mid-morning or passing time mid-morning, that if kids are given a chance to pick up a breakfast off a grab and go cart or go through the cafeteria line, but then take their food into that next period and given a few minutes as the class kicks off to eat in their classroom, that there's about 70% of students participating there. And then we see that if we're taking similar to Second Chance, but at the beginning of the day where kids can grab food off a cart or at different locations through the school building that are convenient, and then taking that breakfast into the classroom and given some time to eat in class, that about 64% of students participate, compared with just about 50% of students participating in the traditional cafeteria model before the school day begins. So those are the models that we really suggest. And we think that, you know, bringing breakfast into the school day will really help fill this knowledge gap that we noticed in our work with the NSTOY constituency of just being unaware of whether school breakfast even exists or is even served in their school building. We also think that, you know, obviously teachers think that there's probably not as many students participating as possible, but we think that this, you know, increasing knowledge and awareness of the school breakfast program by bringing it into the classroom will also help increase the number of students participating. And then, as you heard from our couple of presenters so far, that you know, almost 80% of those participating in Breakfast After the Bell have a positive impression of Breakfast After the Bell and don't want to go back to traditional cafeteria model. So that's just a very top level overview of the school breakfast program. We will keep digging deeper into it and going into more details in our upcoming webinars. But before I go back to questions, I just wanted to leave you with a few things that you might be able to do this week. The first thing that I think would be suggested is just, you know, if you have a few minutes one morning this week or next, take a wander through your school building and see how school breakfast is served, see where students are before the school day starts. Think about what barriers exist to students getting to the cafeteria to get breakfast. One school that I was in last year, I was in a high school and I was talking to a young woman and she said, you know, we used to have a little bit of a bullying problem here. And like, I'm a little bit afraid to walk down the hallway at the beginning of the school day because I don't know if there's teachers there supervising or not. And so I'd rather just go without breakfast than have some sort of bullying problem in the school building. So there may be other things going on like that in your building, hopefully not. I really encourage you to talk to your cafeteria and your nutrition staff. So go to your cafeteria manager or see like Angela did or other people. I know Dana McDonough did this in New York. She just made an appointment with her food service director in her district and went in and said like, I want to know more about what you do and how I can help. And then talk to them about not wanting maple syrup in the classroom or in the cafeteria for that matter, and talk to them about why. Ask them how they make their meals. Just get some more information and start to build bridges between the two different sectors. I would encourage you to just go back to your school principal and say, hey, I noticed some barriers to kids eating breakfast. What can we do about them? Here are some solutions I suggest. Could you be like Angela and volunteer to start a pilot in your classroom? Sometimes even just nudging kids to eat breakfast. If you see kids hanging out in the hallway before school or wherever they are and think they could go eat, you know, they would benefit from eating breakfast. If you just said, hey, why don't you guys go eat breakfast? We have research to suggest that nudging students to just participate in breakfast, no matter where it is, increases participation up to like 25%. And then the other thing is to encourage parents to have students participate in breakfast. Encourage them, you know, it's now November, so I know child count is done, but encourage those parents to turn in their free and reduced eligible meal forms as well. And so you already heard from Angela, but this was what she shared with me, and she said I could share this email with her. And so I think a lot of times, you know, when I was in schools, I was like, there's so many barriers, I can't do anything. But sometimes just asking the question of an administrator, asking of a food service director, you can figure out a solution. So she said she met with her principal the week after the conference, and she convinced him to start a pilot program with her fourth graders. She shared her, you know, concerns and what needed to be changed. And that was all she had to do. He met with the food service director, everybody was on board. And now she has everybody's full support. And I think she mentioned at one point that she was up to like 60 or 80% of her students participating. So that's one person creates great change. So if you want to go the next step, and we would love you to do this, we would love you to apply for our No Kid Hungry NSTOY Teacher Breakfast After the Bell Fellowship. And so just to give you a preview of this, and we'll be sending out the link to the application by early next week. You know, part of it will be creating a pilot in your school building, so where you'll be looking at the barriers and thinking through creative solutions to reducing those barriers. But then we really want to learn about what teachers can do in the face of obstacles. So if somebody's telling you no, or there's an obstacle that you need to overcome, what does a great teacher do to overcome that obstacle, whether it's around school breakfast or something else. Obviously for this, we're focusing on school breakfast, but we want to elevate the teacher voice in this work. You want to see how you can serve as a leader by building awareness and educating the other staff in your building and building bridges between ed and nutrition staff and advocate for your students. And then we'll really create a close-knit fellowship here where you're collaborating with the other teacher leaders, national partners, and experts in this space. The other part that I think is really exciting is that we want you to create an action research project where you're thinking about like, yeah, school breakfast is important for hunger, but I also think it's important for chronic absenteeism in my classroom, or it's important in relation to the social emotional learning work that I'm doing. And we want you to create your own action research project where you're diving into your own line of inquiry and setting up a way to collect some data around that line of inquiry. So to get started, before the application comes out, we'd love for you to just take a walk in your students' shoes, think through how school breakfast is served, how can you reduce those barriers, and just start to have conversations. See what other teachers think, see what your building administrator thinks, see what would happen if you went to talk to your food nutrition director. So start thinking about that fellowship, even if you're not sure or you don't want to join the fellowship this year. One thing I should note is that we will have up to $3,000 in funding available for equipment. We'll dive deeper into that next week on our next webinar. But there will be funding available for schools that have an NSTOY member that is serving in the school that wants to participate in this fellowship. We'll have an equipment grant for up to $3,000. If you want more information about Breakfast After the Bell or about this fellowship, we invite you to join our webinar next week on November 14th. We would love for you to come to that webinar with any observations you've made about breakfast in your school. We'll talk more about what model might work best for your school and your students, and then brainstorm ideas with your peers about how you can be advocates for this work. So there's just some more information I'll put up there. But as you're looking over that timeline, feel free to chat in some more questions, any questions that you might have.
Brie, there was a great question from Steve, and he was asking about, is offering breakfast mandatory or is an LEA choice?
That's a great question. So there are a number of public schools across the country and a lot of public charters actually too that don't participate in the National School Meals Program. So I'm not sure if that comes from like the district level, the state level. I'm not sure who gets to make that decision, but I can go back and find out some more information about that for next week.
Perfect, thanks, Brie. And also I had a question. I know some of my colleagues in the room are not NSTOY members, but are equally as passionate about this issue of hunger in the classroom. What do you recommend for next steps for those who want to get involved but aren't necessarily NSTOY members?
I think you can continue to be in our webinar series. Make sure that you take our follow-up questionnaire so that we can get back in touch with you, and we're happy to send some more resources to you and just share with you any other opportunities we have around training or grant opportunities as well. You can also visit the No Kid Hungry website, so it's nokidhungry.org, and look there for some more resources that you can feel free to use and share amongst your network. And then always just reach straight out to me if you're interested, and we can think through ways that we can collaborate as well.
Awesome, Brie. And one of the questions in the chat box from Marguerite is, I'd love to share this with my principal. Is it being recorded? Yes, this is being recorded. We will share the link with those who participated in the webinar tonight. I believe you'll be getting that and a feedback form shortly after the webinar. So you'll have all that information. And then Karen had a question, Brie. How do you know if your breakfast program is part of No Kid Hungry?
That's a great question. So No Kid Hungry doesn't actually administer the breakfast programs. Those programs are administered through the local school district, whether that's through a district food service employee direct employed to the school district, or a food service management company that's on contract, or a vending service. No Kid Hungry really serves as like a dot connector. So we work to advocate for increased access to the school breakfast program. we have campaigns that are active in a number of states across the country. And then we also work, so we have campaigns where we're funding people on the ground to do this work and to advocate with schools, districts, superintendents, and things of that nature, school nutrition departments. We also work in a lighter touch way in some states where we're doing some work with food banks that are doing some of this advocacy work. So if you shoot me your state, I can look back and see if we're doing any active work there, Karen, where you're located.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Brie. It is 8:59. That brings us to the end of our webinar. Before you get to the exit ticket, Brie, I just want to thank you for sharing this great information with all of us and for getting us thinking about what we can do immediately in our classroom. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. We really appreciate it. I put up an exit ticket there. We'd love to get your feedback either in a chat box or if you just want to direct email me or Megan, just for that feedback loop, it's helpful. And be in touch with us. I'm bdoyle@strength.org, and you guys know where to find Megan at nstoy.org. So thank you all so much. We really appreciate it, and we hope to see you next week on our webinar as well. And please be in touch if you have any questions in between. I'll leave the exit ticket up for another minute or two.
And Brie, kudos to your dogs who didn't make a peep during the whole webinar.
Don't jinx it. Don't jinx it.
Brie,
There's our contact information.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And Brie, I'll write your email address in the chat box so that people can see the exit tickets.
Okay. Oh. I hope they haven't been, Catherine, because there are new couches here, so they better not be eating them. Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great night.